Hello students, this is Sumit Kumar, Assistant Professor, BBA Department, Mawardi College, Ranchi. This present lecture is based on the continuing series of last lecture, which was on IMF, its functions, and its policies. So, uh, from the last lecture, here we'll start with how the IMF originated, how what was the reasons behind the origin of IMF, then what are the resources of IMF from which it finances the member countries' needs and requirements. Uh, the evolution or the origin of IMF lies in the inter-war situations between 1920s and 1930s, and countries were very much interested in uh, reserving their reserving their resources in their own country, and for this purpose they were devaluating their currencies so that the resources in their country can be maximized. But the devaluation of currencies was leading unrest in the international trade, and their competitors started to follow the same strategy, and uh, uh, because of that international trade was getting affected. Because of these reasons, uh, 49 countries had a meeting at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, and they agreed upon constitution of one international monetary institution for supervising and controlling all international monetary and exchange related issues. In the year 1944, IMF came into existence in the year 1947 when 29 countries signed an article of agreement for the constitution of IMF. On the next part of this session, we will deal with the size and membership of IMF. Today's IMF is the result of historical forces which will which are going to continue in future also. At present, nearly all the countries of world are member of IMF. The eligibility criteria for any nation or country to be the member of IMF is first one, first one, it must be a country. Second one, it must be in control of foreign affairs. And third one, it must be capable of fulfilling eligibility criteria of IMF. Now about the staff of IMF. As the size of IMF expanded, so as and so is the size of its staff and diversification of its staff members. In the year 1946, there were 100 staffs belonging to 15 member nations working in IMF, and at the end of year 2006 there were 2,800 staff belonging to different member nations. The staff of IMFs are generally economists, lawyers, statisticians, writers, linguists, editors who contribute their services in IMF. The headquarter of IMF is situated at Washington DC, US. There are small offices at Brussels, Tokyo, and other places. Uh, there is one office at there is one office associated with UN UN office at New York. The next section is related to organization and management of IMF. The article of agreement provides for board of governors, um, one executive board, uh, one managing director, and the staff of international civil servants belonging to member nations. The Board of Governors is the highest decision making body, uh, comprising comprising governor and one alternate from each member nations. Governors are appointed by the member nations. Most of the powers of Board of Governors are delegated to executive board except some reserved powers, and they meet once a year. Next important unit of IMF is executive board. It comprises of 24 directors and one managing director. All the directors of executive board are selected by 24 directors are selected by the member nations. Executive board is responsible for all the functions of IMF. The term of managing director is 5 years, and he is the chairman of executive board. The managing director is uh, chairman of the staff council of IMF also. Now in the next section we will come to know about the sources of IMF by which it finances the needs of member nations. The first and important source is quota subscriptions. Each member nation has to subscribe with IMF with uh, their resources. One third of the quota subscription is given by the member nations as a reserved assets, which are either in the form of SDRs, special drawing rights, or the currencies of uh, currencies of other member nations. The rest of the amount is given in member nations' own currency. Quota subscription by the member nation decides about their voting rights in the IMF meetings and important decision makings. More is the quota subscription, more are the voting rights of member nations. Quota subscriptions are one of the important source by which IMF IMF provides finances to member nations. The second, the second important resource for uh, keeping the reserve of IMF is strong is borrowings. The Articles of Agreement provides for borrowings to strengthen and to manage the resources of IMF. The borrowings can be for filling up the resources subscribed by or quota subscriptions by the member nations. The IMF can borrow money from 11 industrial countries or the 26 member nations as per the article of agreement. It can borrow from them so that to cope, cope up the requirements of quota subscription resources. Secondly, the IMF can borrow from bilateral sources so that whatever or whichever concessional loans are provided by IMF to low income countries, the concessional interest rates can be subsidized. For this purpose, IMF borrows from bilateral sources at the low interest rate which is below the market interest rate, and finances low income countries at the uh, uh, concessional interest rates. The difference in the market interest rate and the interest rate at which IMF borrows from bilateral resources is considered to be creditors' contribution towards concessional loans provided to low income group countries. The borrowing the borrowings apart from borrowings, IMF also get grants from the bilateral sources for supporting the subsidized interest rates of concessional loans given to low income group member nations. The next important resource of IMF is gold sales. Before the 1978, when the second amendment was made in the Articles of Agreement, subscriptions and transactions were taking place through the means of gold. After the second amendment in Articles of Agreement, transactions in gold were limited. Now, IMF can sell gold on prevailing market prices, and it can accept gold only for discharge of obligations of member nations. So the use of gold in IMF transactions have been limited. So this was all about the present session and present lecture, and hope you will like it and learn something from it, and we'll continue from here in the next lecture. Thank you.